Ford trying to come in alone. Shoot! Score! 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 Yannick Ford! Yannick Ford, baby! He wins it for the Lightning! 5-4 in overtime!
Taylor the shot, redirected, score! Game 7, Martin St. Louis! We are going back to Tampa Bay! A Cavalier spinning, a Cavalier looking, trying to drop it off, brings it in himself, left it in the middle, shot, score!
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Thunderstruck with your host, Philip Wunderlich, co-host Jake Ricker, and other co-host Michael Wax. What's going on, guys?
Nothing much. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing well, doing as much as we can in terms of quarantine.
It's pretty boring stuck at home, no sports going on and anything like that. So I hope everybody's staying safe. And let's talk about the first pressing issue that we have, playoff format. We briefed on it a little bit last time, but there's been a few different options. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, Jake?
Yeah, they've continued to just throw out, a bunch of random ideas because basically at this point, what all sports leagues are doing is they're saying, it's like when you go to that first day of class and your teacher tells you there are no stupid questions. And so people are just throwing out random things because they're thinking of anything that they can do to try and get the league back up and running. So there's one of the most recent ones I heard is apparently they had a phone call, a bunch of the commissioners with President Trump, and a lot of them were talking about bringing the playoffs back. And I would assume this would be in a regular format, but having fans sit, basically there would be a seat in between each fan, which is something interesting because I don't know how this would work logistically, but that's one of the things they've started to throw out.
Yeah, and I don't know, speaking of fans, I don't know if you guys saw that. I think it was soccer. They did those little cardboard cutouts of fans, and you had to pay money to be have a cardboard cutout. I don't think that's going to work out very well, but I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah, but like you said, they are just trying to basically throw darts on a board and see how playoffs would work. What do you have to say about it, Mike?
Yeah, so there have been a couple of things over the past couple of weeks regarding this, and I've done a lot of reading about it, and the two that make, I guess, the least amount of sense to me are the wildcard expansion and the 2014 format, which if you want everyone to be involved and you want to really make this as fair as possible, I think the 2014 format would be exciting for fans. But, I think that Jake was completely right when he talked about, like, we're just throwing darts at a dartboard right now, and nobody's really hitting that one idea that everybody is loving. It's more just hitting the periphery right now.
Personally, yeah. I think that they should just stick with the regular the one I've liked the most is, a regular playoff schedule, except you end up just pushing next season's start time back a little, and that next season ends up becoming a shortened season. Because I think trying to change the playoff format to try and fix, teams that were getting on a playoff run and getting close to maybe grabbing that wild card spot. I think there's too many variables in there where you could upset fans. Like the whole, I saw one that was thrown out that said, even Detroit could still be in it. Like you can't do that. Like even those teams way down on the bottom, it's just, there's a lot of these things that just don't work. So I think that one is my favorite of just bringing a regular playoff schedule back. But we'll see what they decide. A lot of this also depends, again, still, because we're still waiting for the trend to start going down. Yeah. So we don't know how long that's going to be either. So, we could get to the point where they're so far behind at this point that they could just have to say, okay, forget this season. We got to move on to the next one. And I don't know when that point would be, but I think that's something they got to start considering soon.
Maybe starting in November, because like you said, things are going to have to be pushed back more and more. And that's kind of the unfortunate truth of it. But I kind of like the idea of having the, kind of not playing out the regular season because it's going to take too long. And then just have the two teams that are closest as a wild card have a wild card game. I think that would be kind of cool, kind of like baseball.
Yeah, that was another thing they talked about was, and I think it would only be applicable. All these things are basically only applicable for this year only, but doing I think it's 7 versus 10 and 8 versus 9 series, like a best of 3, to see who would move on to be in the actual playoffs.
That would be interesting, and I think it'd be pretty entertaining.
Too is the entertainment value.
I do wonder, because of all these things that we've heard and all of the cities that have been contacted for possibly hosting these, when we get to something like the Final Four, because they would basically quarantine all of these teams together in their different little divisions of a playoff bracket. When we get to something like the Final Four, do they have to then quarantine for 2 weeks and then they can play?
I don't know how those logistics would work out, and that's a tough thing to answer. Yeah, I really don't know how that would work. I would assume if they were to bring them back, it would just be where those teams are strictly this whole time throughout this whole playoff process are basically quarantined essentially, and they're not intermingling with any other buddy but the individual team. So and if you waited the 2-week period at that point, that's extending the playoffs. It would make it so long. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think you can do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one of the things too. I don't know if you guys saw it, but they were saying that maybe they could all be in North Dakota, who doesn't have a really strict law regarding this whole COVID-19 thing. So if they're all together in one state, they can have multiple rinks going, but it won't be in a professional format.
That's one thing I don't think I would like at all, personally. I mean, I hope they can bring it back with fans. That's something else. Something else you have to consider here too is a lot of these ones that are talking about bringing about at a later date are considering it with fans. They could bring it back with no fans sooner. I mean, Florida declared sports essential, so if they really wanted to, they could do it down here in Florida. But I just don't know how that would work without fans. It would be so weird. I don't know how players would react to that. We saw players like Brad Marchand saying that, he doesn't know how he feels about getting the cup in that kind of scenario. Some players don't like it. So, I wonder how that would work for players.
Yeah, and you mentioned before about the 1919 and how they had to stop because of the Spanish flu. There was only one game deciding that, and they basically said, "Oh, because you've won this many, and you won this many." They were going to decide it for them, and they're like, "Oh no, we don't want to win this way. We want to be competing." And like you said, Brad Marchand too, he wants to compete for it. He doesn't want to just be handed it. So, another thing too, you want to talk about empty arenas? I mean, speaking of Florida, you can just ask the Panthers how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll be hosting next year's All-Star game, so.
Yeah. Well, there'll be definitely a bunch of fans in that. Or at least I know there'll be some Lightning fans that would like to make that trip down there.
That was another thing that they talked about was if they do move the season back to November or December or whatever in order to keep the season going, hopefully, or not having the bye weeks and the All-Star break, which as a fan, I kind of like that. I did have an opportunity to go to the All-Star game in 2018 when it was in Tampa, and it was fun. But I'd like to see the teams get a little bit more time between games and not have the bye week.
The All-Star game, we said, I mean, it's almost become it's almost like a joke almost nowadays because, I mean, you be selected and then they're like, oh, we don't want to go like Ovi does, or, or we have players like Dylan Larkin that says, oh, don't vote me in, vote somebody else in.
Yeah, the All-Star game has become basically a spectacle for fans that get to go because, like you mentioned, Michael, I got to go back when it was in Tampa too, and it was awesome to go to. I really enjoyed that. But it's weird, because originally the All-Star game, its problem was the game because, we had the skills competition in the game. And the problem with that was the game was, the games were like 24 to 13. Guys were just scoring ridiculous amounts of goals. It was this very low energy, low paced game. And now, eventually, in today's day and age, what we've started to see is the game's gotten better with the 3-on-3 overtime competition. I really like that. I don't know about other people. I think most do. But we've started to see them hurt the skills competition now. Like, for example, when they took away the anything goes shootout, that was a fan favorite. And that's something that brought a lot of fun and excitement to the All-Star game. So, and I think a lot of fans are with you, Michael, and would be okay with not having the All-Star game, because for a lot of people, it's just not that big of a deal.
And I know a time where like it used to be a big deal, but I feel like the only All-Star game, All-Star weekend that really matters right now is the NBA, because they've tapped into something that people love, and even that people are finding ways to really discount it. So I think at this point, if we just maybe turn the All-Star games into something ceremoniously, people get voted into the quote-unquote All-Star game, and we just continue with the season. This upcoming season, whenever it starts, and canceling out bye weeks and canceling out All-Star breaks, it might be a catalyst in order to change how things are done.
Yeah, that's true. Let me ask you guys this though, in regards to when or how we can bring hockey back. I think there's two things you got to look at. I think you have to decide between, do you want fans in the arenas, or are you willing to do it without fans? Because I think that's a major factor in when sports in general can return. Because if you want fans in the arena for that experience to make it a real, playoff like, you're gonna have to wait. It's gonna take a while. You got to wait for this to totally start to go away. Maybe even have a vaccine, however that long that takes. Or you could go with no fans and probably do it a lot sooner. So for you guys, what do you think is the best? What would you want? Would you want fans or no fans?
I would say that it doesn't really matter too much to me. Like of course you'd like to be there and celebrate with the team, especially if they win the Stanley Cup. But at the same time, like I feel like we gotta get it done. Like it sucks that, like I said, it sucks that there's no fans. But to the point in time, we say, okay, enough is enough. Just get it done with, and then we can go to the next season.
I would tend to agree with that. I think that I would be devastated if the Lightning were to win the Cup, and it would be the first, real championship that I were to experience from Tampa, because I was too young for the other ones, and I would be celebrating by myself. That would be kind of heartbreaking. But at the same time, we need to move on eventually. We need to get to next season eventually. And if we have to do it without fans, so be it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important question for fans is, are you willing? Because, for example, the Lightning have a chance to win the Cup. We all know that. Are you willing to see your team win a Cup but sacrifice not having the opportunity to be there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I would totally be willing. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the Lightning 2004 Stanley Cup game when they won it. And I would love to be able to say that I've been to every Stanley Cup game that they've won. But, given the situation, I don't want to have the Lightning not even have a chance at winning the Cup this year, and, then always be thinking about what could have been, because, our team's going to change this upcoming offseason. So, and something interesting I saw on Facebook is somebody said that according to Paul Porter, I don't know how accurate this is, so take it with a grain of salt, but they said the Lightning are making plans to play the season without fans if it continues, and will pipe in crowd noise during breakaways and goals, and the goal horn will sound when we score. So, that's another interesting factor to think about it. So you'd still be cheering from your living room, screaming your head off, and waking up all your neighbors, and there'd still be some kind of feel of crowd noise within the stadium if that's what the route they go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it might be a little silly, but whatever works.
Let's talk about, too, I want to mention this. I think it's important, too. Colby Cave of the Edmonton Oilers, he recently passed away in a terrible situation. And I think we just want to pay some respects to him. I mean, I personally didn't even know who Colby Cave was. He's not a big-time player, at least in in broad perspective of the NHL, but a very, very sad situation when the teams learned of his passing in an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, and anytime, a 25-year-old dies, it's really sad. I mean, especially the instance that he had. I mean, he had blood rushing through his head, and he basically, died because of that and its complications. And it's almost unfathomable to put it into words. Like you said, he might not be a big name player right now, but he had a lot of talent, and maybe in a couple of years, he would have been really great. So hard to say.
Yeah, and my heart goes out to his wife Emily. Like, they had gotten married like not even a year before, and I can only imagine what she's going through right now with a national crisis and what she's going through with her emotions and what happened with her husband. And like, he was perfectly fine a couple of days before it happened, and then things change. And so again, I've done a lot of Colby Cave highlight watching over the past couple of days because I've had a lot of time, but it really seems like from everything that I've heard and from all the players and coaches and everything is that he was a great person more than anything. And so I very much I feel really bad for his family.
Yeah, and a little bit. Let's move on to a little more positive note. Looking into a little more of the off season at this point. Whenever that ends up, Dustin Byfuglien, he got terminated with his contract with the Jets. Him being hurt and out for the season. They have moved on, which is really big news because Byfuglien, is a big time defender. So and that's a big loss for the Jets, especially. Obviously, we already knew that he wasn't coming back this season, but even for the next couple of years, he's a very good defender. So it makes you wonder, what's he going to do these next couple of years here as he's getting older and still chasing that Stanley Cup?
Well, he actually does have a Stanley Cup that he won with the Blackhawks, but he is, like you said, he's an absolute unit. I mean, he's massive. I think he's like 6'5", like over 230. Like, he's huge. And that, sometimes that's not a great thing to be that big because you have complications health-wise. But at the same time, like, he was a great defenseman, and hopefully he can get back to there. I don't know who would be able to sign him or if he would come back, but like I said, he would be a great addition even to a bottom six role. What do you think, Mike?
I agree with you guys. It never seemed like a problem of can he produce? It always seemed like a problem of health because he had that ankle injury. But the lasting image, and I've heard a couple of varying things of whether or not he'll come back. But if he doesn't, if he does, I would love the Bolts to get him. If he doesn't, my lasting memory is going to be in the Western Conference Finals with him holding two Vegas Golden Knights players on the ice, like one with each hand. It just showed how much of a monster among men he actually was. So if he could become 75% of that, I would love for the Bolts to look at him and see if he could maybe help us out.
Yeah, and the reason I bring up Byfuglien is because Michael, you mentioned before we started the show, we were talking about Kevin Shattenkirk and how he said that he was willing to take a more team-friendly deal. I mean, you were mentioning how he's probably willing to do that because he's already being paid by the Rangers. And when you look at a guy like Byfuglien who's getting older and is getting paid a large amount by the Jets, is that another situation where you could get him on a really cheap deal? Because obviously that's what we would have to do if the Bolts wanted a shot at him, because we're going to have a very tough time with the cap. And there were reports I know of the cap not going to move up at all, although I've heard that's also false. So, it could still happen, it sounds like, but that's not set in stone. So the Bolts are going to have a hard time with the cap. We all know that. So is a guy like Dustin, giving up a guy like maybe Braden Coburn and going to sign a guy like Dustin Byfuglien who get really cheap, is that something the Lightning could look at? Would a guy like Byfuglien do that?
I mean, I don't know why not. I mean, like I said, he has his issues, but at the same time, like, I feel like he would like to come to a cup contender or maybe getting a second cup. And it would be a huge addition. We're doing it a right shot D-man. And I mean, I'd rather have Bufflin over Jan Ruda. I mean, it's not saying like Jan Ruda's played bad, but the caliber defenseman is completely different.
I hesitate to go with the plan of dropping Coburn because he does have a no trade clause, and that's a whole mess in and of itself. But again, it comes down to health with Bufflin, and if he's healthy, it's really tough to do medicals and physicals at this point because of coronavirus. But if they could, find a way to see, is that ankle, can he skate on that ankle?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what his decision is and whether he's going to come back and whether the Lightning could theoretically have a shot. Because, like I mentioned, it's going to be tough. We don't know we're going to lose some people for sure, but it just makes you wonder: could you bring in Bufflin on a cheap deal to replace a couple of guys if you have the cap space available? I also want to talk about too, guys, is Alex Killorn. He's been having himself quite the time during this quarantine. He did a Instagram live video a little while back where he was riding around on a jet ski talking to some of the Bolts players, pulling up to their docks. And I think he is planning on doing another one. So I don't know if you guys got to catch that.
I unfortunately didn't catch it, but I was hearing good things about it. His doc talks. I thought it was pretty funny that he's doing that. Like I said, I unfortunately didn't watch it, but it's great things to kind of pass the time for him, and it gets the fans back involved in hockey and getting to know him more as a person.
In a society right now where people are starved for content and people are really wanting the Lightning to come back, it's a perfect blend of he called himself an influencer, which is, the term that people use kind of sarcastically, but he really is he's given a lot of people some content. He's talking with his old teammates. I want to say he was the first person to talk to Stamkos since his injury in a public setting.
That's part of the reason why I wanted to mention this is because he did talk to Stamkos, and it seemed like from what people could tell, Stamkos was looking pretty good. So it makes you wonder what's he going to be like when we come back.
Yeah.
The things too, because we thought that it would be a couple of weeks of an injury, and at the time, we were just barely going into playoffs if they would have began. So we thought that he might miss the first round, but now with all this stuff going on, it's been delayed, and he could be ready as soon as the hockey picks up again.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned this, or I mentioned this on the last podcast we did, but this playoffs might be, if it happens, the most fun, entertaining playoffs there have ever been. And they're always entertaining, but if you can get a full-strength team of the Lightning with Steven Stamkos, Jan Ruda back, Vegas, Mark Stone is going to come back. Carolina, both their goaltenders, Dougie Hamilton, Brett Pesce, those type of players, that would be awesome. And it would make my heart hurt a little bit because I'd always be scared of every team that we face. But as a fan of hockey, it's the best case scenario.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's the thing too. I mean, you have, like you said, all-star caliber players that could come back from this. Even Mikko Rantanen of Colorado is dealing with injury. I mean, he's one of the best players in the league right now. So it would be really fun to watch, like you say.
Yeah, and a bit of breaking news. I've seen from the fourth period. Canada and the U.S. have agreed to keep their borders closed until May 21st, and I think this is notable because if you're the NHL looking to restart the playoffs, you're probably going to have to wait until June.
That's true. It would be very difficult. But could you still do a playoff scenario? Well, you probably couldn't even go over the border now if you wanted to go. Just do it in one location, so that wouldn't even work. So yeah, that is big. I personally, the way I see this playing out is it's going to be a while until we get an opportunity to play. I don't think it's going to come back early with no fans, and I think it's going to take some time.
Like I was saying, summer hockey is becoming more of a reality.
I've heard a lot of things about ice conditions being a problem this summer, and I think it would be more helpful for people to understand that if someone, wrote about that, because I don't think people fully understand the extent of what the problems would be in the summer and how they would need workers to work basically a time and a half to figure out like how to make the ice suitable for playing conditions.
Well, my question is this: if the ice conditions are a big thing, right? But they can have an outdoor game in California. I mean, the Ducks and Kings a few years back had an outdoor game at Dodger Stadium. So I mean, I don't think it's that big of an issue.
I don't know, but I've heard some things. So
yeah,
my guess would be that the guys they have working at these rinks and know how to work with ice. I think more than likely they would be able to do it and get it done and do a good job of it. Now, sure, could they have a harder time doing it? Probably. I don't know. I'm not an ice expert, but my assumption would be that this is not something that would prevent them from playing in any location. But who knows though? Maybe because, like I said, I'm not an ice expert. Maybe it is a bigger problem than we know, which would be interesting to see how they handle that. But I believe with the technology available today and the guys that they have working now, I don't think it would be too much of an issue personally.
And then one more thing too that happened while we were gone is that Daniel Walcott just got signed. I know I'm kind of a big fan of Daniel Walcott, especially for Syracuse, because what type of player he is. He's a gritty type of player, and he's really interactive with the fans and stuff like that, and that's a big deal to me too. What do you guys think about this? I guess you could say small signing.
Yeah, I like it. I think Daniel Walcott's a great player, and it is a small signing. It's not like it's gonna have a huge impact on the cap or anything like that. So he seems like he is happy to be here. He was talking about it on Twitter that he's looking forward to it. And that's something that's really important, I think, for players to be, excited about them being here and wanting to continue to move up through the organization. So, I haven't paid too much attention to him personally in Syracuse, but he's a good depth guy to have. And who knows? We've seen these players pop up out of nowhere in Syracuse. He could be one of those guys that jumps up and ends up making a big impact for the Lightning a couple of years, especially with the way things could be going with cap.
Yeah, I know a lot of people got scared when they originally saw the Lightning's press release about it and it said 1 year, one-way contract because he's done a really good job. He did a really good job in Syracuse, especially bouncing back from what a lot of people thought would be a career-ending injury with his shoulder. And he did well. He put up, I think it was 19 points in 55 games. But a lot of people were like, no, he's not ready. He's a fourth-line guy in the AHL. That would be terrible if he were to jump straight to the NHL. But the Lightning thankfully corrected it. It's now a two-way contract. So he is probably going to stay in Syracuse, I would say, for the remainder of the season. And I think a lot of people were disappointed when he wasn't named captain last year for Syracuse because, he was really the heart and soul of the Crunch, and he has been for a long time. And next year will be his sixth season with the Crunch, his eighth season in the AHL. So I think a lot of people were expecting him to be the captain, and then Luke Witkowski came back, and those plans got derailed. But people really like his leadership. I know that a lot of people, especially the quintessential Crunch person on Twitter, which is Alexandria of Raw Charge, was talking about how he's done much better as a forward than he did as a defenseman. But overall, I think he's a good leader. He can put up points if he has to, and he can knock the lights out of someone if he has to.
Yeah, and like you said, these players can get called up in case of injury or anything else. So we might see them next year. God forbid we have any injuries, but they're kind of bound to happen. And that's one of the things too that we have to look forward to, as well as the Black Ace. I don't know if right now, I don't know how Syracuse is doing in standings and stuff like that, but if they got knocked out of the playoffs or what have you, he could come up too.
He could. I don't know if he would be. I think there's a couple other guys that the Lightning would look at first before him. I still think he's lower on the call-up list. So I think it would be a couple of years. But, like we were just mentioning, though, with the leadership, I think that's why this is such a nice, good signing, that everybody can get behind, is because of his leadership. And even if he's not the guy that comes up in 2-3 years, whatever, he could be that guy that, in the locker room really boosts his teammates around him. And those guys, like Alex Spierre-Boulette, Verhage. Well, Verhage's up now, but those kind of guys that were with him, and he puts to the next level. So I think that's the big thing for him. I would love to see him get a chance at some point and have a good year, but I just wonder where he is at on the depth chart of when they're looking at who to call up.
I don't think he's very highly rated. Just looking at people, and I know points aren't everything, but he's really middle of the pack in points, and he's played a lot more games than everybody else. And there are young guys that really deserve a chance as well. But so I look at, Phil, you talked about black aces. Like, I'm really looking forward to Barry Boulay. Smith is another great black ace. Taylor Radish. Ross Colton is another one that's completely, very underrated. And then I think that what you'll see next year for Daniel Walcott especially is him taking over the leadership role even more. I talked about him being a good leader, but him taking it over even more with Corey Conacher leaving the Crunch next year and signing overseas. So it really, I think you'll see something new out of Walcott.
Jake or Mike, do you have anything else to add to this one here?
No, I don't. But I would like to say, for if you guys would to be looking out for a new exciting bracket we're going to be releasing soon. We're going to try to put together a bracket to try and pick who the fan favorite Tampa Bay Lightning player of all time is. I think this is something we could be fun that we're doing while we're stuck inside and still with no sports. So be on the lookout for that and be ready to try and vote for who your favorite player would be, and let us know who you want to see in the bracket.
All right, Bolts fans, have a good one. And like I said before, everybody stay safe and take care.